have you sitting here. If you want one last cup of tea or coffee, now would be the time to go up and get one before we get into the nitty-gritty of our discussion. I am passing around a sign-up sheet. If you signed up last week, please sign up again. If you did not sign up last week, because this is your first week of being here, please sign up. So, the moral of the story is please sign up. Dr. Frank Spina is Professor Emeritus. I wanted to say Rector Emeritus. It's funny how you get into this. At Seattle Pacific University, he taught there from 1973 to 2019. So at least as I counted, 46 years? 46 years. And he came out of the Free Methodist tradition, but I will say he saw the error of his ways. And
so did they.
And the delightful thing, I got to meet him because of something I didn't sign up for, but you know how any job description you have has other duties as assigned? And I was the associate at St. Margaret's at the time, and the rector there went on sabbatical, and he says, oh, by the way, I committed for this guy to come and do some Episcopalianizing while I'm gone. And he goes, you can help him out. And by the way, he's a professor of Old Testament, so watch it when you preach. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And obviously the delightful experience I had was, that was Frank Spina, and it was the start of our friendship together. He has, I could read you all the things he's published in. He has like a Vita that's this long. You have to start gluing pieces of paper together. But he's well known as a speaker in the area and as far afield as through Oregon, Washington, and other areas. And as for those of you who were here last week know, he's very engaging. So we will go back, and he's going to do a little summary of last week to get us into it. So in case you either during the week have forgotten what he said, or this is your first time here, fear not.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. If you forgot what I said, well, that makes two of us, I guess. That's one of the problems of getting this advanced age. Very, very quickly, what I'm trying to do is a couple of things. One is we all recognize that Jesus was a Jew, but we pass it off that that's that. Fine, that was nice. We can talk about what he had for supper, but not much in the way of theological or ecclesiastical implications. So last week, I talked about the several hundred years prior to the time of Jesus, and this was after the exile, when Israelites / Jews were dispersed all over the Mediterranean basin. And as they began to develop specifically Jewish religious traditions, and I say Jewish religious traditions because to talk about Second Temple Judaism is an anachronism. The Judaism that we know today, in all of its iterations, whether it's Reformed or Conservative or Orthodox, is part of Pharisaic Rabbinic Judaism that was born in the ashes, so to speak, of the destruction of the Second Temple by Rome in 70 of the Common Era. So we're talking about religious expressions. Jews were by no means monolithic, and we just get a glimpse of that. In the New Testament, we realize there's not just Jews, but there are Sadducees, Pharisees, Zealots, Samaritans, Essenes, who are not mentioned in the New Testament, but these are the people from whom we got the Dead Sea Scrolls. So these are all various factions of Jewish religious expression, all of whom believe that they are the best example of a resurrected Israel. That's the effort. We want our way of being Israel is better than your way of being Israel. And of course, in these dispersed communities, they were emphasizing things that would build community. And that's why they began to deal with the myth of ethnicity, that we all have the same ancestry. Or we're going to emphasize kosher laws, because that's going to distinguish ourselves from the cultures that are surrounding us. We're going to emphasize the land that God gave us and we want to return to. Now, we're not going to be able to return to it because the Greeks are going to have something to do with that. The Persians are going to have something to do with that. The Romans are going to have something to do that. But that was the dream of many of them. They wanted to emphasize keeping Torah, again, as a way of distinguishing themselves from the other populations. There was also a second temple. All of a sudden, Jerusalem is becoming more and more important. Historically, Jerusalem was not that important. The northern kingdom in Samaria was much more politically and socially significant, but Jerusalem got all the really good symbols in the several hundred years before the birth of Jesus. So, my main issue here is that these are all people who are trying to resurrect Israel. And resurrect is not too strong. If you remember the famous parable of Ezekiel of the dry bones. These bones are dry, but they're one day going to have sinews on them. They're going to have flesh on them. They're going to be animated by God, and they are going to rise again. These dry, desiccated bones will live again. And so every group that is, in terms of religious expression, they're going to outdo their brothers and sisters who are Jewish in some ethnic sense, but very, very different religiously. Even in terms of the temple, which was so important, there was the belief among many of these that the leadership in the temple were corrupt. The Essenes, for example, would not set foot in the temple because it thought that the priesthood and those who were in charge of it were not good Israelites. They were not good Jews. They were to be avoided. So you have all of this tension, and yet it was a very, very productive time intellectually in terms of things that are being written and that sort of thing. This is a time when monotheism really gets congealed, and when monotheism starts getting mature, that's going to raise a huge problem, and that is, where does evil come from? If there's only one God, and that God is good, and that God is loving, what in the hell are we going to say about all the evil? Because it's all over the place. We saw that with the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Where does that come from? And so you start getting stories about angels that went bad, the fallen ones, from which the Hebrew is Nephilim. Naphal is to fall. So all of these things are going on, and then we come to the first millennium of the Common Era, and the first year in our calendars now. That's when Jesus comes, and so today we're going to deal with Matthew's nativity story, the first 2 chapters of Matthew. Now, here's the thing: whoever wrote Matthew, and we don't really know, but whoever wrote Matthew would have heard from his editor, to whom he had submitted his manuscript, almost surely these words: "Man, you can't start out with a genealogy." No one's going to read beyond that. No one's going to do that, because we want your first paragraph, your first chapter to be engaging and illuminating and captivating, and genealogies are not that. Well, it all depends on the genealogy. If I told you that my maternal grandparents were Philip and Constance Morosco Lovato, you'd say that'd be nice. But if I said, oh, by the way, I'm related to, leave aside the Italian thing, I'm actually related to JFK. See, you already noticed that. So if that was my genealogy, Kennedy's a famous political family, or if I said I belong to the Bushes, another important political family, both of them fabulously wealthy, then I would have your interest. But no one is going to be interested in my maternal grandparents or my paternal grandparents. These are not those names. These names, Matthew would say to his editor, you got to get a grip, because of the people to whom I'm writing, they are going to be interested. Now, to you and me, the only genealogy that's interesting is our own, right? What is that, 23andMe? We all do that spitting thing and figure out who we are and that sort of thing. But in this genealogy, it's not just a list of names. If you actually read the names, you say, oh, these aren't just names. There are very, very interesting things. For example, here's the beginning. I'm going to do you the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Christ is a title. That's right off the bat. Oh, Jesus the Messiah. Son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, if you know anything about the Old Testament, you know you don't do David before Abraham. You start with Abraham. That's Genesis. David, you don't get till Samuel. 1 Samuel 16. Why would you start with David? Because of the connection you're going to make with Jesus and David. Now, as the genealogy starts, again, if you know Jesus' Bible, and the people who wrote Matthew knew Jesus' Bible, and they knew that the people who were going to reading this would know Jesus' Bible. Jesus' Bible is what Christians call the Old Testament. Jesus simply called it the Scriptures. Okay? Right off the bat, you'd say, wait a minute, these are interesting names. Abraham was the father of Isaac. That's easy. And Isaac was the father of Jacob. That was easy too. Jacob was the father of Judah. Huh? Who was Jacob's first son? They knew. You don't. Reuben. We made a sandwich after the guy. Judah is the fourth born son of Jacob to Leah. Rachel famously doesn't get pregnant for a while. That's why all of the dysfunctional family stuff going on. So why would you say Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers? Everybody knows that the oldest son is a big deal. Not here. The fourth son, because that fourth son is the one from whom kings will come. That's what Jacob will say in the famous blessing of his sons in Genesis 49. The scepter will not depart from Judah. So right off the bat, when the author says Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers, none of whom are named, you say, oh, Judah is a big deal. And then as you go through, when it comes to David in the genealogy, we're talking about David, the king. So it's not just a genealogy, just not unpronounceable names, but the genealogy has an agenda. So, Judah, from whom comes David. And then the very last part, I just love this. Who was remember Joseph? Christmas time, right? Joseph was Jesus' dad. Who was his father? Jacob. Another Jacob. So right, Jesus' grandfather, so to speak, is Jacob. So the genealogy ends up with Jacob, the father of Joseph, the father of Jesus. Now, this is a royal genealogy, and they have no interest in the fact that it's not the genealogy of Mary. And genealogies are enormously theological. They're made up, so to speak, to make a point. And the reason I am bold enough to say that, have you ever looked at Luke's genealogy of Jesus and compared it? David doesn't appear. The son of David, or the son of David, there is Nathan. It's a new guy. How in the world does this count? Because Luke is trying to make a different point. But here what Matthew says is, you can't be more Jewish, you can't be more Israelite, and you cannot be more royal Israelite than Jesus, who I'm going to start talking about. So that's why, Mr. Editor, you should publish this, because it's going to do very, very well. 2,000 years ago, so we're still reading this thing. So, now it's Jewish, right? But there are 4 or 5 names that are quote-unquote not Jewish. Can you name them?
Rahab.
Pardon?
Rahab.
Rahab. Good. She's the 3rd or 4th one. We'll go back there. Tell me who is Rahab?
She's a prostitute.
She was a prostitute. What kind of a prostitute?
A good prostitute.
I'm sure she was very good at what she did. I have no question.
She helped out.
She helped out, but where did she live?
Jericho.
And what the world is she doing in Jericho? What kind of a city is that? That's a Canaanite city. She's not just any old prostitute. She's actually a madame. She has a house. Remember, the spies famously go there because it says a full-service hotel. Right? And she is, and she helps them out. She has the best confession of faith in the whole book of Joshua. It's even better than Joshua's. And she and her family are part of Israel to this day, according to the text. All right, Rahab's one. Who else?
How about Ruth?
Ruth. Where did Ruth come from? Moab. And who else? Ruth is a Moabite, right? And Moab and Ammon were born to who? There's this famous story about Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot escaped. His wife didn't make it. He and his daughters made it, and they thought they were the last people on the world, so the 2 girls said, we don't have any future, let's get the old man drunk. There are no men left, we're going to have children by him. So this was a product of incest. A Moabite is the product of incest between Lot and his 2 daughters. You could not be lower in status than Ruth the Moabitess. She's a big heroine. She's not Israelite, though, unless you want to do the Lot. Lot was a nephew, so she's sort of the alcoholic uncle that you have to invite to the picnic. You just hope that he doesn't fall into the potato salad. Okay, all right. So we got Rahab, Tamar. Oh no, we didn't do Tamar yet. Tamar's really important. How did Tamar get in there?
That's Solomon's daughter?
No, this is she was David's daughter, but she's not the first Tamar. The first Tamar is in Genesis 38, and she deceives her father-in-law into thinking that she is a prostitute.
Yeah.
He sleeps with her, and that gives Judah a future. Judah, David. David got into the world because Tamar, a Canaanite woman, fooled her father-in-law into thinking that she was a prostitute. The misogyny in that story is such that you say all she had to do is stand on the street corner and she knew that this guy was going to proposition her. All of the misogynistic issues in that story is what illustrates that. And then the last one is someone who's not named, but she's simply the one of Uriah. That's how the Greek has it. The one of Uriah. Bathsheba. Right. So there are these 4 or 5 either outsiders or marginal characters that are part of the genealogy, so they're saying that this Jesus guy could not be more Jewish, but there are some implications about that because of these people who have sneaked into this genealogy. Okay.
Oh, it's a sexy story.
All the Bible's sexy. That's why I tell my students when they read it, hide it with a Playboy magazine.
Good choice.
Which they only read for articles anyway. All right. Now, after this genealogy, we're going to get into this story. Then we have this story about Joseph's dream. Joseph, whose father is Jacob. I love that little reappearance of Jacob there. He has not slept with her. We're talking about sex, right? He has not slept with her, but she's pregnant. So he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. And at that point, an angel of the Lord appears to him in a dream. And the angel reveals the circumstances of her pregnancy and tells Joseph to name this guy Jesus. Now, Jesus is a Greek word. Jesus almost never heard the word Jesus. He would have been what we would anglicize as Joshua. What does that name mean?
God is given graciously. No, that's your home.
That's Yo-Yo-Hum.
God is my salvation.
God is salvation. God is salvation. Yah is salvation. And so again, that name is telling you what the gospel is going to be about, what the good news is going to be about. Then, when she tells the angel might have been a woman, we don't know, but when the angel tells Joseph about her birth, the angel says, "For he will save his people from their sins." Now, in the context, whose people are Jesus?
Jews.
Yes, Jews, Israelites. Every time you find the word Jews in the New Testament, put a slash and then say Israelites. If you were talking about the Old Testament, that'd be called Israelites. Jews only come in the later parts of the Old Testament. So that's because Judah is not yet prominent enough to give the name to the whole community. But Jews are Israelites, and when the angel says, he will save his people from their sin. Not all people, but his people, Israel, or the Jews, are in mind. Then, the implied narrator lets us know that this revelation fulfilled a prophecy from Isaiah, chapter 7, verse 14, and the text occurs in the context of Israel being saved from Syrian aggression. You know this story? The Judean king is being besieged by Syria. Hezekiah is the king. The Lord says, I've had enough. I'm going to take Syria off your plate. Isaiah, I want you to go to Hezekiah and tell him no problem. So Isaiah says, not to worry. God's going to save Israel. And if you'd like, I'll give you a sign. Hezekiah says, I don't need a sign. That's great news. And I says, I want to give a sign. I'm going to do a sign. Sit down. So, yeah, if you're all set up to do a sign, you want to do the sign. So I said, here's the sign. A young woman is going to have a baby, and before that baby is old enough to know the difference between right and wrong, whatever that age is, 6, 9, 40. Syria will no longer be a problem. And then when it is read Christologically, the idea is this. If the birth of a baby in Isaiah's day could signify Israel being saved from Syrian forces, how much more the birth of a child to another young woman, who the Septuagint says is a virgin. The Hebrew doesn't say that, but the Septuagint said that, and the Greek version said that, and that's where the virgin birth stuff comes from. How much more is the birth of this child going to indicate not just being saved from Syria, but from everything that haunts us as human beings? So that's why you have the 7:14. And if you look at the text, which I will now do very, very quickly. Let's see, I'm sorry, 7:14. So for the Lord himself will give you a sign, a young woman shall conceive, bear a son. You shall call his name Emmanuel, which they didn't, but the name does mean God with us. And the Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and your father's house such days as have not come since the days that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. In other words, we're talking about a king. We're talking about Israel's rescue. All right. And Joseph obeyed the angel and did not divorce Mary and married her. Okay. Then we go to chapter 2. The Magi show up. Now, by the way, in Matthew's nativity story, none of the stuff that we do in creches come from there except for the Magi. We smoosh all this together. There's no stable in Matthew. It's a house. There's no inn. And there's no angels and that sort of thing. But it's sort of, this is a straightforward version of the story. These wise men from the east come to Jerusalem because they want to know the location of the one who had just been born, who they refer to as the King of the Jews. Where is this new King of the Jews? The King of the Israelites. King. Not just Israelites, but kings. And they go to Herod to ask about this. What was Herod?
King of the Jews.
He was king of the Jews. Now, he was a puppet king. And it's kind of interesting because he would have been despised by 9 out of 10 Jews, Israelites. He was a puppet king. He would have been right there with tax collectors. Because tax collectors were Jews who were basically, from the point of view of Jews, you're betraying us by collecting taxes for the Roman government. So Herod would have been despised. But he is a king. Kings are notoriously paranoid about rival kings. They don't like them. So they come and they say, we want to find out where this king is. We want to worship him. Now this is interesting because this is so un-Israelite. Israel does not worship kings. So if you're going to worship this baby, he's going to have to be not only a king, but a very different kind of king. Now, Matthew had presented him as a Messiah. A Messiah perhaps can be worshipped. Not in the Old Testament, but that starts. So this worshiping thing is kind of interesting because Jews are not about to worship anybody except God. Herod says, he gathers the theologians, always gather the theologians, and says, the scribes, we're going to get the scribes, we're going to get the high priest. Where in the world is the king of the Jews is supposed to go? To Bethlehem. And it's Bethlehem because of a prophecy in Micah. And in that story it says, the prophecy from Micah gives us another clue as to what's going on with Jesus here. In Micah, I've lost my place. I'll be right. Okay, it's in Micah. Oh, here you are, 5:2. But you, Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel. Ruler in Israel. There's that king motif again. And whose origin is from old and from ancient days. So the prophecies and the biblical stuff that is put together is to establish Jesus as not just an important baby, but as a king and a ruler. Now, if you're going to be a king or you're going to have a ruler, you have to have one requirement. Someone over whom to rule. There are no, for example, I live alone. I am the literal king of my castle. And that's exactly why it looks like it looks. Because I don't have to worry about anybody. But I'm going to have a hard time to convince anybody else my kingship is not very elaborate. I can tell myself what to do. That kind of gets boring. A king has to have a people. You have to have a populace, a population. Kings have to, if Jesus is a king, the next question is, over whom is he king? Just a few weeks ago, we had the King of Christ Sunday. Well, you can't be a king if you don't have people. And so all of this language is royal language about Jesus over Jews, over Israel. Okay, so when they find out it's Bethlehem, the wise men, by the way, there are no three. They're not three.
Oh.
No, they're just simply wise men. We think that they were three because of the gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I've got it on good authority that there was at least a fourth one who didn't get mentioned because his gift was fruitcake.
The song, fruitcake.
The song is wrong. I love the song, but it's not biblical, that's all. So the wise men, they go and they see the star again, and the star is illuminating the house, and they go in, and of course what Herod had said to them, now you go and find this baby, and you come back to tell me, because I want to worship him too. Yeah, sure, right. I'm going to be real anxious to have this new king replace me.
Mafia.
And he's nefarious and he's diabolical. And of course, this too leads to the famous killing of the innocents. When they go there, they present Jesus with gifts and they worship him. And again, this is so un-Israelite. The only way you could worship Jesus is if you could argue that he was deserving of worship, which means he has to be more than a human being. And this is all hinted at. It's not explicit yet. And of course, the early fathers of the church are going to make a great deal of this. They recognize the wise men realize that Jesus is special. He is the incarnation of God, and that's where you get the theological arguments there. So, now I love this way Matthew put. When Herod found out about this baby, all Jerusalem was troubled. That's what the text says. All Jerusalem. And again, that's completely opposite. Everyone would have been thrilled at the death of Herod. And he does die before the chapter's over. So the Magi worship the child, give him gifts. They had seen the star again, and after being warned in a dream not to encounter Herod again, they went home another way. Then, another dream, it says, Joseph, you got to get out of town. This Herod thing is going to roil for a while. You've got to get out of town. You've got to go to Egypt. And there's this wonderful irony here. It is now safer for the Holy Family to be in Egypt than it is to be in Israel. The Egyptian king is not nearly as dangerous as Herod, the king of the Jews. And so you have almost a reversal of the imagery. We all remember the Exodus story. Moses goes to Pharaoh's, let my people go, and all of this. But now, all of a sudden, Egypt is safe. The Egyptian king is safe. Herod, the king of the Jews, is unsafe. So they go there. And then in another dream, when Joseph is told to return, take up residence, he takes up residence in Nazareth. Why? Who replaced Herod as king?
Herod.
No, his son. But the son wasn't great either. So you got to get it.
Herod, though, aren't they?
Pardon?
Aren't they all named Herod?
All they what?
The whole dynasty, all the men named Herod.
No, I think I think the name is given actually.
Archelaus?
Yes. Thank you, Archelaus. And of course, then he goes and lives in Nazareth, and that's how you get Jesus of Nazareth in Nazareth, because it was too risky to be in Jerusalem with Herod's son as the new reigning king. The main point here is that Jesus has this very, very important role in Israel. And in Matthew, it is decisive. Do you realize what Matthew says in chapter 10 to his disciples? Now he's an adult. And here's what he says in chapter 10, verses 5 and 6. Jesus is sending out his 12 disciples. Go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans. Don't go see Gentiles, non-Jews. Don't even do Samaritans, who thought of themselves as Jews. But go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and preach as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So this is something that is being preached to Israel, just as we had in our gospel reading today in Mark. Same thing in Matthew. John, everybody comes from Judea. Israelites, Jews come to repent and get baptized. This is a very, very Jewish Israelite thing. There is no so-called Gentile mission in the Gospel of Matthew, or for a matter, any of the other Gospels. Now, outsiders are going to eventually be part of this, but you first have to get things settled with Israel. Because Israel got the first promises. And Matthew is saying this, and the other gospel writers are saying, is that Jesus did not come to start a new religion. Christians have been very, very guilty of saying, well, Jesus started a new religion. No, Jesus says, well, we're dealing with Israel. Don't even bother with the Samaritans. Don't go to the Gentiles. We're dealing with the lost house of Israel. And all of this business of the Isaiah prophecy, this is all about post-exilic Israel getting recongealed, recommunionized, because this is going to, then they're going to be, the argument is that they're going to have to establish the kingdom of God. Now, Gentiles are going to be part of that. Samaritans are going to be part of it. Everybody can be part of it, but you have to do it by being part of Israel. And that's why Paul would later on talk about being grafted onto the tree or adopted as a son or a daughter. But Israel is the big deal. Israel is God's elected people to get to the world. Let me tell you a little, this is a footnote, okay? There's this wonderful rabbi whose name is Lapid. He believes in Jesus' resurrection. He does not believe Jesus was the Messiah, but he does believe that God resurrected him from the dead. And he says a couple of things. Number one, he says, who am I to say what God can do or not? Who am I to say that God couldn't resurrect Jesus? There's a couple of resurrection stories in the Old Testament, or his Jewish Bible. God could do that again. And he says the best thing about Christianity, they don't have the Messiah, but they have put Moses' traditions throughout all the world. God be praised. This is a very interesting rabbi. And I think he has a whole lot of trouble with some of his other rabbis. It's almost like Daniel Boyarin, who's the greatest Talmudic scholar in the world, and he argues that the idea of the incarnation is a Jewish idea. It's not Hellenistic. It was a minority idea, because the idea of God being incarnated in Israel, well, if God can be incarnated with a people, can God be incarnated with one human being? Now, Boyarin also does not believe Jesus was that incarnation, but he believes that the incarnation was indeed a Jewish idea. And it was an idea that was greatly debated. Jews are great at debating theologically, and Christians are pretty good at it too. That's why we have such divided churches. We confess that we are one, holy and Catholic, but a visitor from Mars would say, it doesn't seem like you're one at all. You're not even close, actually, and you're still, in fact, Protestantism made division a kind of a sacrament. We keep saying, we are better Christians than you, so I'm going to take my Bible and you follow me. If you come, someone else is going to get their Bible, you go there. And so we have divisions, divisions, divisions. And of course, we're part of a church that knows that all too well. Okay, so So this tension is between Israelite exclusion and Gentile inclusion. Gentiles are included. In fact, they are included from the very beginning. That's the whole point of my little book, The Faith of the Outsider. Esau, who is not part of the promise, has the greatest story of graciousness of anyone in the Bible. He was cheated out of everything. His mother was against him, his brother was against him, his father was hapless against him, and even his God was against him. Good thing it wasn't me, because I would have taken vengeance. But when he finally gets a chance to go see Jacob, he runs to him, embraces him, kisses him, and does not even want the elaborate bribe that Jacob had concocted for him so that he could appease him. He said famously, "Yesh li rav, I have enough." Esau, an outsider. Tamar, a Canaanite woman who was desperate to have a future and deceived her father-in-law. And even in his own testimony, he says, "She is more righteous than I." Rahab, it sounds like she had been reading Deuteronomy in her confession. Her and her housemaid, and famously, in chapter 7, Achan, you can't get more Israelite than Achan. His genealogy goes 4 generations right back to Judah. He and his family are expunged with extreme prejudice. Ruth, Bathsheba, and others. So already you have these implicit outsiders who are part of it, and it gets even more into the New Testament. Now, of course, Paul famously says, I'm for the Gentiles. We're going to do this for the Gentiles. And he was so spectacularly successful that in a few centuries, Christians thought, we have a really good Gentile religion, and we are against Jewish religion. And that started one of the sorriest episodes in church history. It's just god-awful. You cannot make it right. After a while, it wasn't just a theological argument. Now you're starting to be negative simply because someone is a Jew. And the history of this only gets worse and worse and worse. It's easy to blame Hitler. Hitler could not have done that if that ground had not been cultivated in virtually every Western and Eastern European country. It wasn't just Hitler. And 60 years ago, Episcopalians are members of country clubs, no Jews, no blacks. So we're just not talking about those people. We're talking about these people. But anyway, all of this is completely unbiblical because Jesus came for Jews, Jesus came for Israelites, and he wants to get Israel's act together, and then you and I are going to be grafted onto that and made part of that. That's the hobby horse that I'm on, trying to get the church to say, again, Boyarian says, Judaism and Christianity are twins joined at the hip. Joined at the hip. Now, I'm happy to say that there is continuing theological movement in that direction. I just recently went to a conference in San Antonio, Texas, the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature, American Academy of Religion, the largest religious learned society in the world, and I went a day early because I was interested, and I'm now a member of this group. The name is awful. The name is Anti-Supersessionism. Now that just rolls off your tongue, right? Supersessionism is the belief that Christians replace Israel as God's elect people. And that's how Christians have been acting for almost 2,000 years. It ain't so. Even Paul said the promises that God made to Israel are irrevocable. Jews do not sit around saying, do you suppose God deceived Abraham and Sarah? No. Now, there are theological problems we have to deal with, but we have to deal with them by saying, is it possible to be a Christian, a good Christian, a thoroughgoing Christian, and not being supersessionist? And that's not easy. There's a lot of stuff to work out, but that is what we're trying to do. And I'm trying to argue that the biblical understanding, if we take the text seriously, leads us in that direction. Okay, let's open up for questions now. I'm starting to lose my audience. Go ahead.
I have a question about the placement of the genealogy followed, as the genealogy of Joseph, followed immediately by the fact that it's a virgin birth. So Jesus biologically wasn't Joseph, so why do we care?
Genealogies in the Bible are theological statements. They're not about biology.
But it still seems, yes, but then it still seems weird to go down through Joseph, and then it's like, oh, well, and he took Mary as his wife.
That's right, and every famous woman in the Bible has to have help from God to get pregnant. If you're going to be a famous biblical woman, you can't get pregnant. Rebecca has trouble. Sarah has trouble. Rachel has trouble. Hannah has trouble. Mary had trouble. That's a way of saying that God is in this. Yeah. Go ahead.
Can you say a particular point at which the Christians decide the Jews are no good?
By the second, the polemic got so terrible. So-called people who follow Jesus, they're still in synagogues. When you read the book of Acts, they're in the synagogues and they're arguing from the scriptures. And this is an intramural Jewish debate about whether or not Jesus is the Messiah. Toward the end of that century and getting into the 2nd and 3rd century, the acrimony is so pronounced that they start thinking of themselves as not just different theologically, but even different existentially. You follow a different God. You follow a religion, different religion.
Is it because the people who followed Jesus were not participating in the Jewish traditions at that point?
No, they weren't. As late as the 3rd century, there are Christian bishops who are scolding Christian congregations for still doing Jewish things. It's like worshiping on the Sabbath. See, the Christians do not work on the Sabbath. They worship on the first day of the week, the day of the resurrection. So we say, well, we're going to follow all the 10 Commandments. Well, we don't follow that one. So the hierarchy of the church, or the growing hierarchy of the church, they're so worried about the problem of Galatians, the Judaizing, that we want you to be a complete Christian, and you're still being Jewish. And this even happened in the so-called Inquisition era, when Jews were forced to convert. And of course, if I have to keep my job, I'll convert, but I'm going to go to synagogue. I'm going to keep Seder, I'm going to do the Day of Atonement, I'm going to do Yom Kippur, and then the inquisitors say, wait a minute, you're not a real Christian. So you get all of that mess because you have forced Christians. So it's a very, very murky and muddy story, but eventually the church thought itself as completely separate and different from the synagogue.
So the 2nd century approximately, or wiggly?
It's wiggly, yeah. But by the 3rd or the 4th, and then with Constantine, that changes everything because...
That's
yeah,
4th century.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. You guys have good questions. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Okay, next week we're going to deal with Luke's nativity. That's where you get all your crash stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.